For episode 4, as we've mentioned earlier, the Thundercats are not the only ones to build their fortress thanks to the Robert Burbles who became their first friends. The mutants are doing the same. And so they're building Castle Plundar, as we're about to learn in this episode. So the story begins with the Thunderkittens exploring just like any person would do. That was until what the Thunderkittens saw was unbelievable. They're a bunch of Brutemen, and they're carrying something on their shoulders. But they're not alone because the mutants are with them, in which are Jackalman and Monkey. And also there was Slythe, the leader of the mutants. Wily Kid and Wily Cat just couldn't believe what the mutants are doing. They're making the Brutemen slaves to build Castle Plondar. That's exactly what was going on in their case. So Wily Cat made a suggestion to his sister that they should investigate, so that's what they did. As they investigated further, what they saw up ahead was unbelievable. Castle Plondar. That's what the mutants were mentioning earlier. Now you can tell right then that the Thunderkins didn't like the looks of the place, or let alone had the nerve to go inside of it either. Can't say I blame them. So Wily Kit made a suggestion to her brother to say that the Thundercats must know about this place. But before Wily Kit could do anything about it, that's when her brother says, "Look, there's Monkey, and he's right there below us. And he's leaning against a tree about to rest." And speaking of Monkey, he just found out that a coconut came from below the tree and conked him on the head. So by the time that Monkey stood up and saw what was going on, that a coconut just conked him on the head, thanks to Wily Kid's clumsiness, it was now time for the Thunderkins to leave. But not before Monkey decides to chase after them in the tree, of course. As Monkey was pursuing the Thunderkittens, Wily Kid told her brother, "Hurry, hurry, he's right behind us." Well, the good news is that the Thunderkittens makes it to the other tree, but now here comes the bad news. Monkey was right in front of them. Things were looking bad for the Thunderkittens. That's when Wily Cat says, "Go, save yourself, I'll hold him off." But Wily Kid tells him no way, and that she suggested that they should face Monkey together. So, Monkey told the Thunderkins, "Well, thanks for saving me the trouble of chasing you." And that's when he goes on the attack, but the Thunderkins dodges his attack, and that causes the kittens to split up. Anyway, back with Wily Kid, who just met up with her brother across the way from the tree, and when she saw him on the branch, she knew that there was no time to lose, and so she threw a capsule at the branch, and that causes some kind of a substance for Monkey to slip on that causes him to fall off the tree. So when the Thunderkins banded back together, it's now time for them to get to Cat's lair to tell the Thundercats what had happened. So meanwhile at Cat's lair, well, good news, the entire lair is finished, including his head. So Tigra, along with Chitara, who's inside, suggested that all they need now is some telescopic lens and some equipment so they can see what's going on Third Earth. "You know," Chitara said to Tigra, "I wouldn't have believed it myself had the Robert Burbles have followed this plan so carefully." And of course, she's not kidding because it was the Robert Burbles who became the Thundercats' first friends, just like they did in the last episode, who built the place. Now, Tigra, who agrees with Chitara, says, "We ought to thank our friends, the Robert Burbles, for building this place for us." "There's something else we can agree with," Tigra said to Chitara, "because none of this would have been possible if it wasn't for their help." And that's when they saw the Thunderkittens coming back, they being Chitara and Tigra, and they just told Panther what had happened. So Tigra suggested to Chitara that they should see what was going on, and so that's what they did. So down below, the Thunderkins explained to Panther about the Brutemen and how they were building this place called Castle Plondar. And of course, Panther says, "Whoa, wait a minute, take it easy here." So Panther told the kittens, "Look, here comes Tigra and Chitara. Maybe they want to hear about it." And so when they did, that's when the Thunderkins explained what had happened. They said that the Brutemen had become slaves of the mutants, and they built Castle Plunder where they just left from. They being the Thunderkins, that is. So when Tigra asked the question, "What do you mean by Brutemen?" then Wily Kid said, "I'm not so sure if I can describe it." Well, Roberbill, the leader of the Robert Burbles, was more than happy to explain what the Brutemen were like, and so that's what he did in front of Chitara and Tigra. So Lionel and Snarf comes up to Tigra and said, "What's going on?" "Well, the Thunderkittens just told me," Tigra explains, "that the Brutemen have been enslaved by the mutants and they built Castle Plundar." So Panthro suggested that there's no better way for the Thunder Tank to have its test run. So that's what happened. So all of the Thundercats, Tigra, Chitara, Lino, all went to Castle Plundar. Except for the kittens, of course. So later at Castle Plundar, Monkey just told Sly, the leader of the mutants, the bad news that the Thunderkins got away. Also there was Jackalman, and he too have heard the bad news. So after Jackalman got upset about the bad news, that's when Sly, the leader of the mutants, was asking Monkey the question. "So let me get this straight. The Thundercats are on their way here. Am I right?" And Monkey insisted that is indeed correct, and that the Thundercats are on the way. But Jackalman's getting worried that the moat wasn't finished yet. But Sly has a better suggestion, to have the Brutemen build the barricade instead, and so that's what they did. So long story short, after the barricade is finished, that's when Sly, the leader of the mutants, says, "Lock up the slaves in the dungeon." And so that's what the mutants did. Back with the Thunder Tank is now on its way to Castle Plundar, but there's a barricade. So, you know what this means. That means the Thunder Tank will have to break through a barricade in order to get through the castle, so that's what it did. Well, good news for the Thundercats, they managed to break through the barricade and they had arrived at Castle Plundar. But there's bad news. There's not a mutant or brute man in sight anywhere. As you may have guessed it, Lino has a hunch that the brute man must be inside the castle somewhere. So he suggested to his Thundercat friends that he should investigate and check this whole place out. So that's what he did. So Lionel went inside to investigate, so that's what he did, and he looked everywhere in the castle to find the Brutemen, wherever they may be. But Lionel didn't have to look very far because he just found the Brutemen inside those cages. Meanwhile, outside the castle, Jackalman of the Mutants just spotted Chitara of the Thundercats. So, as you may have guessed it, it's Chitara against Jackalman. So after that brief battle, Jackalman tries to run towards Cheetar, but instead he collides into a rock. While that's going on, Monkey meanwhile goes one-on-one with Tigra. Anyway, long story short, while that is going on, Panthro meanwhile goes one-on-one with Sly, the leader of the mutants. Anyway, after Panthro and Sly are exchanging insults with each other, that's when they decided to go on a combat with each other, and so that's what they did. So, anyway, Panthro just asked Sly the question. "I believe you've had enough, right?" So Slythe made a suggestion to say, "Perhaps maybe we can go on the hand-to-hand combat instead, right?" Well, Panthro agrees with that, and so that's what Slythe and Panthro did. But that was until when Panthro started chasing after Slythe after he runs off. Back with Lino inside the castle's dungeon, well, good news, Lionel just lets out all the Brutemen and told them that they are free and they can leave, but the Brutemen were somehow confused. But instead of going out the other way, that's when they surround Lionel, the Brutemen that is. Back with Slythe, the leader of the mutants who ran from Panthro earlier, he said in his case that since he couldn't beat Panthro physically, he had to find some other means. Then he realizes that the dungeon door has been opened, so Lino must be inside. Then when Sly saw the Brutemen surrounding Lino, he thought to himself, "Wait a minute, maybe I can use that as an advantage." So what does he do? He has a plan. And by how, you may ask? Well, Sly thought if he can use the warp gas grenade, it'll turn the gentle creatures like the Brutemen to be revolting. So that's exactly what Sly did. He uses the warp gas grenade in front of the Brutemen. And when that happened, the Brutemen turned revolting monsters and they began attacking Lino. But Lino's surrounded by the warp gas too. Back with Panthro, he too entered the castle looking for Slythe, the leader of the mutants. Oh, he found him all right, but Slythe wasn't alone because a group of Brutemen that was revolting earlier, thanks to the warp gas, were coming towards Panthro. Things were looking bad for Panther when he was surrounded by a bunch of revolting brutemen. When back with Lionel, who was unconscious at the moment, he suddenly woke up and found out what had happened. Then suddenly Lionel's sword just told him that Panther's in trouble. So, just like what any good guy would do, looking through the sword's eyes, Lionel saw that Panther was surrounded by a bunch of revolting brutemen. However, that was the same warp gas that affected him, just like it affected them. So, Lionel knows what to do. He uses his sword to project a Thundercat signal to signal Tigra and Jutara that are still outside the castle, and so that's what he did. So by the time that Chitara and Tigra saw the signal, they know that there was no time to lose, so they go inside the castle. So speaking of which, back with Panthro, he tries to hold back the Brutemen that were revolted by the effects of the warp gas. Watching them were Slythe, the leader of the mutants, Monkey, and Jackalman. Although curious, Jackalman wants to know if the Brutemen are revolting, and Slythe, the leader of the mutants, said that they are. So what happened? Monkey asked. So Slythe, the leader of the mutants, just let slip that the reason why the Brutemen are revolting is by the effects of the warp gas grenade that he used earlier. And according to Slythe, what he says in his case, since Tigra and Chitara will be arriving soon, he suggested to give them a welcome as well. So back with Chitara and Tigra, they joined up with Lionel on his way out to the castle, and that's when Lionel told them the bad news that Panther was being attacked. Then Lionel explained to Tigra and Chitara that whatever's going on with them, Panther was trying desperately not to hurt them back. Then Chitara told Lionel, well, if that's the case, then that means we're not going to fight them as well. So Chitara asked a question, what are we going to do about it? Then Lionel says, I'm not sure yet, but we gotta do something and quick. But before Lionel could do anything about it, that's when Tiger says, wait a minute. Maybe we don't have to do anything because something just happened to the Brutemen. And wouldn't you know it, Tiger was soon proven right because back with Pedro, he saw that the Brutemen are not revolting anymore. And he was wondering what's going on with them. Now that the Brutemen are back to normal, Jackerman, who watches them along with Monkey and of course Slythe, the leader of the mutants, he wanted to know what's going on. Well, Slythe explains, it looks like the warp gas effects has worn off. So, why don't you just give them another dose of the warp gas grenade? Monkey suggested. So Slythe, the leader of the mutants, agrees with Monkey's suggestion and threw another warp gas grenade at the Brutemen. So back with the Thundercats, after they saw what had happened to the Brutemen earlier, that's when he discovered that the mutants were using warp gas. So Panther, who agrees with Tigra, he says, I thought the council had ruled against warp gas. Well, they did, Tigra says, but it doesn't mean that the mutants have a rule to break it. Even Chitara agrees with Tigra. So back with Lino, who again is face to face with the revolting Brutemen by the effects of the warp gas. So Chitara tries to warn Lionel the best way she knew how. She says, the warp gas is coming, look out! So Lionel had no time to waste, and so he ran off. So as you may have guessed it, Lionel, as any good guy would do, has a plan to get the warp gas away from him, by the use of his sword, of course. And once Lionel did that, that's not all. The warp gas affected Brutemen head towards the Brutemen instead, and watching it happen were the Thundercats, Panther, Chitara, and Tigra. So back with the mutants, Slythe, the mutants' leader, and along with Jackalman and Monkey, knew that the Brutemen now affected with warp gas are coming towards them, so they had no choice but to run. So now the mutants are cornered and had no place to go. That's when Jackalman panicked and said, Sly, do something! So the mutants decided to hold their breath, and when they did, they broke free from the gang of revolting Brutemen and went right inside the castle. Once the mutants went inside the castle, the wings of the castle had shut itself. So we know what this means. The Brutemen won't be bothering the mutants anymore. The mutants' plan backfired all right, but what the Thundercats didn't count on is that the Brutemen decided to turn on them, and they were still affected by the warp gas. So when the Thundercats saw that the Brutemen are coming towards Lino, that's when they rushed in front of Lino, and that's when Tiger pleaded his case to say the Brutemen had no idea of what they were doing. They're just innocent creatures, that's all. They're just affected by the warp gas. So Lionel, who agrees with Tiger, decides he's not going to fight the Brutemen, but he's not going to run either. So Chitara has her turn to plead her case to say, well, that may be true. Pride may be a good thing, but it's plain foolishness. Well, for the Thundercats, it looks like things are getting hopeless as the Brutemen are getting closer and closer and closer until finally, at the last minute, just like it did once before, the warp gas effects wore off and the Brutemen became gentle creatures again. Now that the Thundercats are relieved with good news, the Brutemen are back to normal. Now that the warp gas effects have worn off, Tigra has his turn to tell the Brutemen that they're okay now and that they could go back to their normal lives. But the Brutemen didn't move anywhere. They were confused. Finally, Lionel has his turn to say, don't you all understand? You're free now. Now that's the one word that the Brutemen can understand, and so they all head off. So yes, you've heard right. Thanks to the Thundercats, the Brutemen are not slaves anymore. So back at Cat's Lair, so after Lionel and the others had met up with the kittens and Snarf, that's when Lionel told Tigra that the only word that the Brutemen can understand is free. And of course, Tigra agrees with that. Then Lionel felt depressed because all the Brutemen wanted to do was just say thank you for everything that the Thundercats did, but they didn't. So Panthro, who agrees with Lionel, says, well, if that's true, then I guess you're wasting your time. Then Lionel told Panthro that that is not exactly true because the reason he did it is because it was the right thing to do. So in Lionel's case, it was the only thing that he could do. And so that ends episode 4.